Okay, well, it's a few days after the 4th, and I still think we're in this great 250-year season, so to speak, so I'd like to think this is still a little timely. I want to talk somewhat about 3 documents that shaped colonial history and therefore shaped the history of the American Revolution. And before we get into that, let's think about the oddity of Independence Day. Now, you look at France, the date for the French Revolution, it's sometime in July. I want to say the 16th, I could be wrong, but I believe it's in July. It's Bastille Day. What happened? Well, the mob, who was tired of being confronted daily by this antique image of tyranny in the form of this prison, took it over, broke it apart, stone by stone, freed the prisoners, of which there was maybe 3. And they were mostly guys with a tie to royalty who were bad at paying debts. But they tore it apart, lit things on fire, and of course, with great joy, they decapitated the commander of the Bastille and thrust his head on a pike and went traveling across the city with it. Then in Mexico, we have El Grito de Dolores, the cry of Dolores, this great ecstatic, cathartic bellow of liberty with a priest at the center of it and the bells ringing and just this palpable energy of liberty. Then we have the 4th of July. The 4th of July is about signing a document. I don't say that to minimize it. I say that to show how profoundly unique the American history and experience is. Now, of course, by that time, we'd had Lexington and Concord, and before then we'd had all sorts of events, not to mention battles. We were at war with Great Britain. And there had been this attempt at a thing called the Olive Branch Petition, and King George completely tore it apart. So that's another thing. You know, someone could say maybe a real Independence Day was Lexington and Concord or something else. But instead, we've made it the signing of a document which officially proclaimed our independence from the mother country. Interesting. Now, this channel is about literary things for the most part, things that are written, and so it seems apropos to talk about the 4th of July on its 250th anniversary or near to that, a revolution which we pinpoint the official independent start of as signing a document. And you might be, of course, aware, John Adams famously or infamously said, oh, July 2nd, that's when we're going to blow things up and drink a lot of beer and have a lot of whiskey. Because that's when the actual vote to be independent passed. But it was on the 4th when all the signatures were fully affixed to it. But again, though, it's about writing and voting on and signing a document. The other thing is, of course, who are the figures there in Philadelphia? They're lawyers. Now, we sort of can't stand lawyers. We require them. Let's forget all of that and just think for a moment what a lawyer does. A lawyer, more than anything else, is an expert in language, rhetoric, and to a lesser extent logic. And I don't say that last part to look down upon them. But of course, forensic rhetoric, that's a branch of rhetoric from Aristotle. It's where we persuade things about whether or not someone did something worthy of condemnation or not, their past acts. And yes, you need logic behind that, but you need the priors of rhetoric as well. And rhetoric is about all the means of persuasion available. So there's a lot of lawyers in the French Revolution, but Bastille Day, that's the common people, so to speak, the sans-culottes, the breechless, going there and ripping everything apart. It's the same with the cry of Dolores, and of course there's a priest at the front of that. Our day, it's not about the soldiers winning a battle, it's not about the common people resisting, it's not about radicals resisting. It's about radical, rebellious lawyers affixing their names to a document. That's fascinating. I think it says a lot about our country to this day. I want to go a little further back, though. I want to talk about 3 or 4, really 4 documents that tell us something about the nature of colonial America and thus revolutionary America, and probably still have value, explanatory value, epistemological value, ideological value for us today. And it's about the fact that there really were 3 cultural regional traditions in colonial America. And they were based on the simple geography. So there's New England in the north, there are the middle colonies, the mid-Atlantic colonies, and then there's the southern colonies. And each one of these regions has one dominant colony. For New England, it's Massachusetts, obviously. For the middle colonies, it's Pennsylvania. For the southern colonies, it's Virginia. But as we break it down, we notice some interesting things. Now, the middle colonies, there are a few major cities, New York, but Philadelphia, that's like the city at the core of the middle colonies. For New England, it's Boston all the way. For the southern colonies, there really isn't a city. And then you look at figures associated with them. Now, I'll go back to this later, but I just want to briefly mention it. You can really map on the cultural, ideological, political, epistemological, use any term here, values nestled within these 3 regions. And you can map them almost perfectly to 3 well-known founding fathers that sort of were the epitome of these regions. For New England, it's John Adams. For the middle colonies, it's Benjamin Franklin. For the southern colonies, it's Thomas Jefferson. Now, I'll get back to those names, and you'll notice how they fit certain things. But first, let's talk about some of the documents. Well, for the southern colonies, it's the Royal Charter for Virginia. For the middle colonies, we're really going to be looking at 2. We're going to be looking at the Pennsylvania Charter of Privileges, and we're going to be looking at William Penn's slightly later Frame of Government. And then for New England, I would say the most important document, one that I believe every American should read, one that I think is beautifully written and historically fascinating and in many ways a little troubling, would be John Winthrop's Jeremiad, or sermon that's meant to get you to do something, like the prophet Jeremiah extolling the people, the children of Israel, to act. It's his Jeremiad, a model of Christian charity. Let's begin with the Virginia document. Now, I'm going to have to be a little gauche and look at my phone a bit. I think I once had a book which was an anthology of many of these documents or excerpts of them. It's probably at the school I teach at someone else's classroom, so I'm just going to be looking at the phone. Forgive me, I don't like it, but that's how it's going to be. Let's talk a little bit about Virginia. Now, one unique aspect of British colonization in North America was that it was piecemeal. It wasn't, we're Spain, we're sending out ships and men. It was drips and drabs. And Virginia was 100% a commercial investment. It was a financial instrument. I mean, it's pretty bizarre when you think about it. It was a stock company. You invested in this company, which goes across an ocean to build up wealth and trade on another continent, and because you invested, you expect a return. Now, of course, this had royal sanction. That was very important. But that already clues you in. The southern colonies with Virginia at the head, it's a form of extreme negative liberty. I'm here to make my fortune, to live my life, and to not be bothered as little as possible. Now, I'll be honest, the Virginia Charter is a pretty boring, very hyper-legalistic contract, more so than the other documents. But just with a little excerpt I'm going to read, you'll notice something interesting here. So from the Charter of Virginia. Also we do for us, our heirs and successors, declare by these presents that all and every the persons being our subjects, which shall dwell and inhabit within every or any of the said several colonies and plantations, and every of their children, which shall happen to be born within any of the limits and precincts of the said several colonies and plantations, shall have and enjoy all liberties, franchises, and immunities within any of our other domains to all intents and purposes, as if they had been abiding and born within this our realm of England or any other of our said dominions. Just go read a tiny bit more. Moreover, our gracious will and pleasure is, and we do by these presents for us, our heirs and successors, declare and set forth, that if any person or persons which shall be of any of the said colonies and plantations, or any other which shall trick to the said colonies and plantations, or any of them shall at any times or times hereafter transport any wares, merchandises, or commodities out of any of our dominions with the pretense to land, sell, or otherwise dispose of the same within any limits and precincts of the said colonies and plantations, and yet nevertheless being at sea or after hath landed the same within any of the said colonies and plantations, shall carry the same into any other foreign country with the purpose there to sell or dispose of the same, without the license of all our heirs and successors in that behalf first had and obtained. That then all the goods and chattels of such person or persons, chattel here means slavery, sadly, so offending and transporting together with the said ship or vessel wherein such transportation was made, shall be forfeited to us, our heirs and successors. Okay, what's at the core of this document? First off, when you go to Virginia, you're Englishmen, and you have rights as Englishmen, and that's good and noble, and you should expect them. At the same time, you're under restrictions, commercial restrictions on what you can do. Now, you would expect this with a legal document. What's interesting, of course, is in the history of Virginia, they had rebellions early on, and they had a few issues coming here and there, but there was always this idea in the southern colonies, in Virginia especially, I'd say, typified by Thomas Jefferson, that liberty is 100% negative. You simply take away restraint, and I will do what I want and make what I need to make for myself and those with me. There's no real higher ideal beyond that. Now, that's not to say Thomas Jefferson had no ideals, but it's just that the ideals are meant for you to make for yourself. There's almost an existentialist quality. And I don't quite remember the quote, but Thomas Jefferson, in one of his more radical moments, said, and this was before he was president, for sure, that, we really shouldn't even have a constitution because we cannot force any form of tradition on the people after us. The people alive now have the right to do what they want to do now, and we don't get a say of it. This is totally idealistic. It's a bit crazy, but it just shows you that attitude. So, give me the most basic restraints on what I can do with myself, my land, my money, and I will make meaning for myself. And again, I believe Thomas Jefferson was a very idealistic person, perhaps a little utopian, maybe very utopian. I think in many ways he's quite distinct from modern libertarians who really do seem to just be nihilistic boobs that, I want to smoke pot and eat Cocoa Puffs and shoot guns because it's fun. And part of the reason I feel free saying that is Thomas Jefferson had this strange statement. He claimed it would take 1,000 years to settle the North American continent. Now, of course, he was responsible for the Louisiana Purchase, and thereby Lewis and Clark expedition. He believed it would take 1,000 years. Now, on one hand, you must be thinking, why would he think that? It didn't take it took almost no time to settle a place. You get there, you put stuff down, you settled it. That's not what he means. When he says settle America, he's saying it will take 1,000 years for this continent to be like Virginia. What is Virginia? Virginia is a place in his mind that is rural. There's no major cities. He hated cities. And in Virginia, you get to be Jeffersonian. That is, you get to hold property. That included people, unfortunately, which he had a hypocritical attitude about slavery. We know that. I won't get into it. You have a right to your property. You have a right to your labor. And you have a right to make meaning for yourself based on these. You need to have literal geographical space to do that. And Thomas Jefferson would say, you can't have a city. You literally need to have like plots of land that a man can go and improve. This is very Lockean. He improves the land, and by improving the land and making it viable economically, but not necessarily commercially. He didn't like bankers. He didn't really care for commercial interests, but making it economically viable, you make yourself a viable, unique individual, worthy of liberty. So he said, it doesn't matter if we plant the flags all over the place and put soldiers there and build homes. If you want to settle this continent, you have to make it look like Virginia. And he said that would take 1,000 years. So again, the Virginia Charter is kind of the least interesting document. You heard how legalistic it is. It's very much a commercial contract, but at its core, it's really simple. You do pretty much everything, a few things you can't do, and you're an Englishman. Now that attitude of being an Englishman, of course, will be at a core of tension throughout colonial history and come to a head with the revolutionary moment. Let's go north a bit to the mid-Atlantic colony. So now we have Pennsylvania, and Philadelphia's in the midst of Pennsylvania. For a long time, Philadelphia was this nation's largest city, with the original capital, for no particular reason except that it's where the most people were, and it was sort of central. Now, of course, we sort of forget Washington, D.C. was originally a planned city. There's a lot of planned capitals out there. We tend to think that's a bit kooky and strange, and sometimes they don't work. Brasilia is kind of a silly example. But Washington, D.C. was totally planned, and I mean, if you look at a map, and you remember there's only 13 states, it is as central as possible. It's about as east and west as you can get, right? It's not right on the ocean. It's not right on the border. And it's about as mid between north to south as you can get. But let's talk about Philadelphia and Pennsylvania. Urban, experimental, and a form of liberty which in many ways is still about lacking restraints, but where the purpose of liberty is self-creation, openness, experimentation. This is Benjamin Franklin. This is 100% Benjamin Franklin. But you know, the history of Pennsylvania is quite interesting. In some ways, it's a much later colony than Virginia. But what happens is King Charles II, I can't quite remember the exact reasons, he feels obligated to William Penn to allow him to establish a colony. We'll name it after himself because of his work and his charity. And, you know, I think Charles II was pretty open about the Quakers. Yeah, they were kind of weird, but they did good things. And Charles II, as we know, he was basically a Roman Catholic. You know, he demanded his brother become king when he died, who was a Roman Catholic. And his father had been executed for many reasons. One of them might be the fact that his father, Charles I, did not put the kibosh on being married to a Roman Catholic. And I bring up the Roman Catholicism simply to make this point. I think someone like Charles II, his relationship with the Church of Rome was not so much all about, yes, I'm a true believer, but more of, I want to be open. I don't want the entire city of London burning blamed on Catholics. I want to have a sense of openness, and I definitely want to push back on this incredibly austere and frankly kind of ugly and extreme Cromwellian Protestant puritanical nightmare. So it makes sense that Charles II bequeaths this charter to William Penn, and in the charter itself, there's such a degree of just openness. Again, I'm going to read a little bit from it. Let's see, where are we? Okay. So this is the Charter of Privileges. Oh, forgive me. I've got this backwards a little bit. Yeah, okay. Let me find it, yeah. Where do I want it? Okay. I tried not to make this episode too long. Obviously, these documents are intensely wordy. There's a reason for that. They need to be. And so I'm going to read this. Hopefully we'll extract what we need to. But here we go. And forasmuch as in the government of so great a country sudden accidents do often happen, whereunto it will be necessary to apply remedy before the freeholders of the said province, or their delegates or deputies, can be assembled to the making of laws, neither will it be convenient that instantly upon every such emergent occasion so great a multitude should be called together. Therefore, for the government of said country we will and ordain, and by these presents, for us our heirs and successors, we've heard this language before, but it's going to sound very different the way it's applied now, do grant unto the said William Penn and his heirs by themselves or by the magistrates and officers in that behalf duly to be ordained as aforesaid to make and constitute fit and wholesome ordinances from time to time within the said country to be kept and observed, as well as for the preservation of peace, as for the better government of the people there. Better government of the people there. Forgive me, this video is becoming very sloppy, but that's okay, I think. Hey, I'm an American. I'm allowed to be sloppy. I'm allowed to love slop. And publicly to notify the same of all persons whom the same doth in any way may concern, which ordinances or will and pleasure it is. Okay, I think there's one more thing from this document I want to read, but I'm just going to leave it at that. I want you to think about the tone a little bit. That's really all I want to talk about. The Virginia Charter, it's okay, you're Englishmen, but you better not do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. We're going to give you a minimum of restrictions, but don't do these things. In this charter, King Charles II is saying, you're free to do this, you're free to do that. He's not outlining the restrictions, he's outlining what you get to do. And he's making this interesting case for self-governance and sovereignty. Basically, listen, you live over there, we live over here. It's reasonable for you to have a certain government in your affairs, and so I'm allowing William Penn you to decide that for your colony. Yay! So you notice it's still liberty, it still has to do with restraints, but we're looking at it from a totally different perspective. Instead of saying, here are the things you can't do, it's saying, here's what I'm allowing, I'm giving you. I don't even say allow, it's in this presence of a gift, of a donation. Okay, and then we get something from William Penn himself called the frame of government. And this, I think, will really bring home how the middle colonies had such a distinct culture and regional idea of themselves, an ideology, and even an epistemology. The way they thought through the problems of liberty was so different from in the southern colonies or New England. And, you know, you'll just see how you get a person like Benjamin Franklin out of this milieu. First, because no people can be truly happy, though under the greatest enjoyment of civil liberties, if abridged of the freedom of their consciences, as to their religious profession and worship, and Almighty God being the only Lord of conscience, Father of light and spirits, and the authors as well as object of all divine knowledge, faith, and worship, who only doth enlighten the minds and persuade and convince the understandings of people, I do hereby grant declare that no person or persons inhabiting this province or territories, Pennsylvania, who shall confess and acknowledge one almighty God, the creator, upholder, and ruler of the world, and profess him or themselves obliged to live quietly under the civil government, shall be in any case molested or prejudiced in his or their person or state because his or their consciousness, persuasion, weird spelling for that, or practice, nor be compelled to frequent or maintain any religious worship, place, or ministry contrary to his or her mind, or to do any or suffer any other act or thing contrary to the religious persuasion. Okay, long story short, think of what's being said here. You have to believe in God. Who's to say what that means? You don't need to go to this or that church, and he's even going to go further and say, use is going to apply if you are in government in this colony. There will be no real religious test. Yeah, you're supposed to believe in God. It's supposed to be one God. It's supposed to be monotheistic. But he's not going to say anything about the Trinity, let alone Christianity. And there's this emphasis on the conscience. Pennsylvania is the freedom of the conscience. It's the freedom to make your decisions about your values. It's the freedom to have an openness to life and experiences and ideas. It's that liberty which is at the core. And you can hear and see someone like Benjamin Franklin coming out of these pages, how he would be nourished in a place like this, in a city like Philadelphia, with this high degree of openness, where liberty is not about, you leave me alone and I'll do exactly what I want. Liberty is about, you give us the gift to recreate ourselves, and we get to enjoy one another's presence as an experiment and be different and strange and be Quakers and not judge other people's religions. And we even kind of be a little coy about it and say, yeah, you need to believe in one God. Who's to say what that means? It's fine. Again, such a different understanding of liberty in many ways. So, it's a very short document, actually, the frame of government, much shorter than many of the others here. I recommend you read that as well. It's very interesting. I don't think it's a great piece of literature, but it's very interesting. And now finally, New England, John Adams, and John Winthrop's A Model of Christian Charity. Now, there's an argument to be made that the American Revolution is really, at first, the Massachusetts Revolt. There were other things happening in the other colonies. There were other events. There were other whisperings. But it was in Massachusetts where things came to a violent, extreme head. So many of these, events we think of before the Revolution proper are set not even in Massachusetts, they're in Boston. There's the Boston Massacre, which itself is kind of a ridiculous name. You can look into why. There's the Boston Tea Party. Then, of course, there was the response to it, the Intolerable Acts, the Coercive Acts, the Stamp Act. All these things we think of, it's like they happen in Massachusetts and in Boston alone, so to speak. Other places have incidents. But the nexus of it all is this one colony where they are just, they're not taking it. And they kind of, and I say this knowing that this was what a lot of other prominent men thought, even who were part of that First Continental Congress. There was this attitude with some, like, why the hell are we letting this colony drag us away from being Englishmen? What the hell is their problem? Let's think about being Englishmen for a moment here. The Virginia Charter, of course, says you're Englishmen, that's a good thing, you have English rights. In Massachusetts, they took this very importantly, but, one of the most important events in Massachusetts is, of course, the Boston Tea Party. And one of the things about the Boston Tea Party I never stood growing up was, why did they disguise themselves as Native Americans? Did they really think that would work? Like the British are going to say, oh my gosh, these crazy indigenous people showed up in Boston and took care of all the tea just in time with the Stamp Act. How strange is that? And we're not allowing anyone else to get tea. Why would they care so much? They don't even live here. And then I learned that's not really why they did that. Yes, they're sort of disguising themselves to kind of, literally disguise themselves. But they pick these particular costumes, not because they're making fun of indigenous people. And whatever we think of the reason they did it, just consider the intent. The intention is really to say, we're not Englishmen anymore. We're from here. We have an understanding of our identity that has nothing to do with being an Englishman anymore. The English don't believe we're Englishmen anymore because they don't treat us like it, so we're not. That's pretty fascinating. Oh, by the way, like another big event, of course, is, tarring and feathering. That's another thing they did in Boston. Nobody else really did that at that time. Okay. Now, New England is settled first and foremost by Puritans. These are not the same as Quakers who, are just kind of wanting to be free, man, and have their own thing. And this is not necessarily really a commercial venture. These are people who, yes, they were fleeing religious persecution, but they also had a mission. They were missionaries, a very strange type of missionary, but they were missionaries nonetheless. And that's at the core of John Winthrop's very beautiful, very worth reading, very long sermon, Jeremiah, a model of Christian charity. And I'm going to read a little bit of it. And I'm going to try to point a few things. And when you read this sermon and you think about the history of the early revolution and the period just before it in New England and Massachusetts, you just realize, oh, God, that's why they acted the way they did. That's why there's no Tea Party in Charleston. Right? Okay. Now, you need to know, John Winthrop delivers this sermon after writing it while they're still on the ship. They haven't even landed yet. He's wanting them to, while they're in the port, so to speak, or docking, I don't think there was officially a port, but you get the idea. They're in the New World, but he needs them to read this before they go out. And again, this is a mission. They're going out. Okay. Now, the only way to avoid this shipwreck and to provide for our posterity is to follow the counsel of Micah, to do justly, to love mercy, to walk humbly with our God. The shipwreck he's talking about, obviously he's allowed to have this great, literal metaphor of being on a ship that survived a voyage. The shipwreck he's talking about is essentially, an endeavor not working out because you're not doing what God wills you to do. Okay, back to it. For this end, we must be knit together in this work as one man. We must entertain each other in brotherly affection. We must be willing to abridge ourselves of our superfluities. That looks so odd. For the supply of others' necessities. We must uphold the familiar commerce together in all meekness, gentleness, patience, and liberality. There he's really talking about charity. We must delight in each other, make each other's conditions our own, rejoice together, mourn together, labor and suffer together, always having before our eyes our commission and community in the work as members of the same body. So shall we keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. The Lord will be our God and delight to dwell among us as his own people, and will command a blessing upon us in all our ways, so that we shall see much more of his wisdom, power, goodness, and truth than formerly we have been acquainted with. We shall find that the God of Israel is among us, when 10 of us shall be able to resist 1,000 of our enemies, when he shall make us a praise and glory that men shall say of the succeeding plantations, the Lord make it likely that of New England. For we must consider that we shall be as a city upon a hill. The eyes of all people are upon us, so that if we shall deal falsely with our God in this work we have undertaken, and so cause him to withdraw his present help from us, we shall be made a story and a byword through the world. We shall open the mouths of enemies to speak evil of the ways of God. Okay, there's more. Obviously, that phrase, we shall be as a city upon a hill, is the key phrase. Sometimes that's what this sermon's called, but let's talk about the official title, a model of Christian charity. We're making a colony because we're going to be a model of what it means to be a Christian for the rest of the world, specifically those people in Europe who we have abandoned. They're going to look at us and realize, oh, they know how to be the church. They know how to be Christians. You see, throne and altar, we're going to prove to them that throne and altar do nothing but destroy and distort the gospel. We're going to do it by being the best Christians ever across here. In other words, what is liberty for New England? Liberty is about being free to be a perfect vessel of God's love, charity, mercy, and justice. And to be so perfect that you're a beacon, you are a city upon a hill. People look out across the Atlantic and they say, wow, that's how we need to make ourselves. Now, it's a weird mission because it's not like literal door-to-door missionary work where you go someplace and you give out the gospel and you try to convert people. They're doing something different. They're going to make themselves a model for others to truly become Christians. Now, you take this as far as you want. You despise it, you love it, you hate it. It's very interesting. I should note a couple things that are intriguing as well. The phrase New England, and when you hear of like New Jersey or New York, you understand what it means. It's very simple. We are in a place, it reminds us of the place we were just from, so we're going to call it the new version of it. That's all. In many ways, it's sort of a lack of imagination. You know, the Dutch called it New Amsterdam. Okay. When he says New England, he's not saying, oh, we're here, it reminds us of back home, we'll call it England. Now, the reason I know he's not saying it that way is because, A, England is bad, it's corrupt. It's got all kinds of problems. They don't have God, they don't have Christ, they don't have the gospel. We don't want to be like them. But more importantly, they're still on the ship. They haven't looked at anything. There's nothing remotely that would remind them of England yet. Why does he call it that? You need to think of this as being a New England, like the phrase a New Jerusalem. He is saying we're going to be England as a holy creation. That's a remarkable statement. New England, in this case, the origin of that term as a region, is literally not, hey, it makes us think of England. It's like England. The origin of that term is we will remake the England that God would demand of the English here across the Atlantic. Now think about the radical nature. You know, so many years later, a couple centuries or more later, during the Revolutionary period, and just prior to it, in Massachusetts, think of all the crazy shit these people did. You know, throwing the tea in and tarring and feathering people. And, you know, just never, and all the propaganda, you know, turning, albeit a tragic shooting, into a massacre. I mean, Paul Revere, he's writing, the British are coming, all this stuff. These people believed, even then, when, let's be honest, they're not really Puritans in the sense of John Winthrop anymore. My goodness, John Adams was a Unitarian. He would have been hung publicly by his ancestors. But they're still got the fire of that Puritan, the puritanical fire, that liberty is about being a model of true mercy, justice, and perfection for the world. That's what we're here to do. And I think John Adams gave a very famous speech on the eve of the vote to become independent, so like very late at night on July 1st or very early in the morning on July 2nd, where he says something about like liberty in this side of Jerusalem, and there's nothing holier than liberty. He uses all this religious language. So the Boston people force the issue. They go crazy. They become a bunch of massholes. And their whole mode of being, their epistemology, their ideology, is in some ways just a slightly attenuated and a slightly altered version of John Winthrop's model of Christian charity. We have a mission from God to become the best human beings possible so that the world will know how to follow God in the gospel. Very radical. And it fits John Adams. So, this video became a lot longer than I thought. I hope it made sense. I hope my reading wasn't too terrible. When you look at these documents, they have such fascinating old school spelling, which in many ways makes a lot more sense than the spelling we have now. But happy 250 friggin' years.